Okay, Imaginary, the latest horror from Blumhouse Productions. The trailers to this film left me intrigued. I was intrigued by the concept. I felt like the ideas within the concept of this story was very interested in sort of the different directions and sort of the possibilities of where this story could go. I just found very intriguing, and yeah, I was quite looking forward to checking this movie out. The plot of Imaginary follows Jessica, who returns to her childhood home to discover that the imaginary friend she left behind is very real and unhappy that she had abandoned him. So like I said, I was really interested by these ideas. I was very intrigued by the concept and sort of really intrigued by what it is they could have done with this movie, because I felt like it could have been a very effective horror story if they really sort of tap into the power of imagination, sort of really tap into sort of how powerful imagination can be, especially when you're younger as a child. For example, with myself, like I used to be afraid of the dark and sort of going into dark places with a lot of shadows. I'll always remember this one moment in my childhood where my imagination just took over, and I would sort of imagine certain things lurking in this sort of dark place in my house, and I will always remember that. So when it comes to imagination and what you could do to create an effective horror, I think the tools are there. There's so much you could do with that premise, with that concept, you know, to tap into those fears that you would have as a kid, like that fear that I had. But unfortunately, this entire movie just felt like a scrapbook full of ideas that just didn't quite piece together to create a compelling, tension-filled narrative full of scares. Unfortunately, it just doesn't achieve that. When it comes to the first two acts of this movie, I did struggle. I wouldn't say they were a slog, because I was always somewhat intrigued due to these ideas, but they never really sort of evolve past the idea. And the first two acts just end up feeling like this very kind of generic, demonic horror movie that we've seen a million times before, full of the classic horror tropes. We've seen a lot of them over in recent years, and a lot of these other movies have done it a hell of a lot better. For example, in recent years, a lot of horror movies, not just from Blumhouse Productions, seem to follow this kind of very similar blueprint of sort of using those first two acts as a mystery, to build up this mystery and tension, and then you sort of have the full surprise, the full reveal in the third act. And one of those films that kind of sort of stand out to me that I really liked from last year, and that was Cobweb, where I felt like it was an effective horror movie that was kind of creepy, and it did something different. But the big difference with Imaginary and that blueprint is it just fails to evolve from that very interesting idea to give us something that's different, to give us something that is creepy, that gets under the skin, and just for it to become a truly effective horror film. It sort of really fails to sort of evolve past that idea to give us something that is different, like a lot of other movies that have followed a very similar blueprint. What they struggle to do with this film is to execute those ideas and give us something that is truly effective. And I'm going to admit, there's a lot I did like about the third act, but it's all just a little bit too late. And I feel like what we do get within that third act, we should have had a hell of a lot earlier within the movie. I would go as far as saying, as soon as the second act, I think we should have really have been introduced into this world. And what I am going to admit is, and I don't think many other people are going to agree with me on this, but when it comes to this other world that we're introduced to within the third act, there's a lot that I liked about it. And there's a lot that I liked about the set design and what it was they were doing within this world. Unfortunately, it all comes just a little bit too late for me. And it also ends up feeling very random as a result of when it is in the story we are introduced and we do enter this other world. For example, we are introduced to a character halfway through this film, an elderly neighbour. And within the third act, there's this moment with this character where she just sort of goes off on this kind of mad how should I call it? Like a sort of a mad rant. And just what they do in that moment with this character and the way they use the camera, it just sort of made this film feel like something from the 80s or the 90s that should have gone straight to VHS. You know, this overall film had that kind of straight to VHS 80s, 90s horror feel about it. And that becomes a hell of a lot more evident within the third act. And kind of, I liked that aspect, but it also left me very frustrated because what this film could have been. You know, it left me it sort of just teases what this movie could have been. The set design within this world during the third act as well reminds me an awful lot of Beetlejuice, and so I'm not entirely sure if the nostalgia that I have and sort of the love I have for films like Beetlejuice sort of really affected how I felt towards the set design and how this world was created within the third act. But like I said, there was just something about the vibe, especially during that third act, that not only did it feel random and out of place, but just sort of really kind of teased what this film could have been, but doesn't really deliver. They do try to inject this movie with this heartfelt story around these characters, this family, but just due to the way it's presented, along with the writing, just the way these characters were written and the dialogue, just really fails to deliver on something that is compelling, that sort of gets you immersed and sort of allows you to feel sort of emotion when it comes to these characters' journeys and this family dynamic. It just fails to really sort of deliver on this, and so as a result, again, I just didn't really feel anything for these characters or this family. The attempt is there, and I do believe everyone is trying their best, but I do believe these performances within the movie are heavily affected by the writing. And another moment that would feel very random, but I also quite liked, but it was a moment that felt random. As you know, once you've watched this film as a whole, it's even more random when you think back on it. And that's these moments when the characters would go down into the basement and you would see this entity in the shadows. Now, I liked how those moments played out because, again, I could see the potential behind those moments. Because if we were if they were bringing these ideas and the story together in a way that was effective, I do really think these moments would have been effective in terms of sort of, you know, for it being creepy or delivering or sort of on the scares, because I just liked how you would sort of, like how this scene would play out, and you would sort of have to use, you know, you would sort of have to look for where this creature was at times, and I just liked how the scene was shot, but as a whole, the moment just ended up really kind of standing out because they don't really do an awful lot with that moment other than there being an entity hiding in the basement just to sort of scare you. But it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. But again, the potential is there of what this film could have been. And before I get to my conclusion, sort of my verdict, I do want to mention a positive, and that is I feel like at least it looked like they were using practical anyway, and I really appreciated that, especially in the third act. I feel like there was a use of practical effects that I just really dug, but again just ended up making me feel sort of frustrated due to what I felt this experience, this story could have been. So yeah, imaginary. When it comes to the human story and those supernatural horror elements, they really just don't come together to sort of make one consistent whole. The ideas are there and you could see what this could have been, but it just fails to come together to feel like one coherent, natural horror story that gets under the skin and just feels like something that's different. Like, you could get movies that follow similar blueprints. As I've mentioned, Cobweb is a good example of a movie that has very familiar horror tropes, but it does something different with its characters and its story, and it ended up feeling, even though familiar, it ended up feeling different at the same time. So yeah, they are my thoughts, and I will be giving Imaginary a 3.5 out of 10. So yeah, There are my thoughts on Imaginary, but what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future reviews from just some random Welsh geek ramble on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. My next review will be for Spaceman, which was released on Netflix last weekend. I'm a little bit late with bringing my review for that, but it will be live on the channel this week. So yeah, thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be catching you guys soon.